Be me. I used to work for a contract cleaning company quite a long time ago. The company I worked for used to specialize in what we would call distressed properties. This involved anything from bank foreclosures, evictions, or estate clearances. Our company was even involved with crime scene cleanup cases depending on the property, the severity, and the price. Of course, that means that we had to undergo specialized training when joining the company to legally be able to handle these kinds of jobs. It's just your basic training in handling biohazards, using different kinds of PPE, personal protective equipment for those who don't know, and that kind of thing. Basic understanding of health and safety regulations. Most of it was common sense, but formal training has to take place for legal reasons. Anyway, most of our jobs were just really fucking sad, if I'm being honest. People leaving behind entire lives they could no longer afford to pay for. Belongings would be boxed up, entire lives in boxes, or sometimes shit would just be scattered across every room in the place, like the aftermath of some whirlwind or some disaster. People at their very lowest. There is one job that I absolutely cannot stop thinking about. It is one that has stuck with me for the longest time, and even years later, I wonder what the fuck I saw. It was a foreclosure job out in a small town. It was probably around an hour outside the city. At first glance, it was just a very standard job. Single-story house on the edge of a cul-de-sac. No broken windows. The grass was pretty tall, but not overgrown to the point it looked like a jungle. Probably about knee-high. The bank gave us the keys, and we got a basic briefing from our boss. Previous owner was some guy called Arthur G. Legally, I cannot give out a full name or any identifiable details, so I am going to try to keep it as vague as possible. This guy had no emergency contacts and no relatives that could be contacted. Just one day, he stopped paying, stopped answering any phone calls, basically fell off the map and stopped existing entirely from an outside perspective. We pulled up to the place at around 9 a.m. I think. I was with my work partner, name is Paul. Guy was in his mid-40s and used to serve in the army, but was discharged years ago due to something medical I think. He did not talk all that much, but he worked very hard, which made my life easier. The front door opened up without issue. The house was surprisingly still. Intact. I can't think of any other way to put it. It was like someone had stepped out to go and get groceries or a coffee and just never came back. Skipped town and moved on with their life. The furniture was still all there and in decent condition. The bed was made. The lights still functioned fine. There was even food in the fridge left over. The power had been shut off for a while though, so it rotted and reeked like death. There were no personal photos anywhere. No mail, no calendars, no medication bottles or anything empty lying around. The closets were also all left barren. The walls were bare, like they had been stripped and scrubbed of anything human. The main floor took around 2 hours in total to clean up. It was when we headed down to the basement when things started to get weird. We found the entrance behind the kitchen. The door was hanging open, slightly ajar. Paul took the lead down there with his flashlight at the ready. The stairs were creaky, but they did not collapse on us, thankfully. At the bottom of those stairs was a large, unfinished basement. It was mostly empty, except for a few plastic bins, containers, and what looked like a small office setup that was tucked away into the far corner. There was a desk, a computer, a wall-mounted corkboard, and shelves stacked full of boxes. We decided to start by checking the boxes and their contents. Most of them were filled to the brim with books of all kinds. Scientific journals, philosophical texts, government archives, and declassified documents that were all printed off and bound into paperbacks. A lot of stuff I didn't really understand if I'm honest. Things about systems theory, whatever that is. Then stuff about pattern recognition and cryptography. This guy, whoever he was, also seemed to have a particular interest in ancient civilizations as well as their myths and histories. None of it was your usual basement junk left to rot. There was no dust on any of the books either. They had not been down here for very long at all. We decided to investigate the corkboard next to figure out what this guy was doing. That is when things got a lot weirder. The entire board was just completely covered in newspaper clippings. They were all meticulously pinned and annotated. Every single clipping was to do with some missing person, not the same one that he was investigating, different people. Most were local, but some were national, with one even happening internationally. They were all different kinds of people who I couldn't really tell how they were connected. Some kids, some adults, couple elderly people. Most of them had photos attached too. There were tons of handwritten notes littering the margins. This guy had noted locations, times, coordinates, and other stuff too. There were also some, I don't know, weird symbols present. I'm not sure how to describe them. Like a combination of shapes with patterns drawn inside them. There was one that was consistent and present every single time. I'm not sure how to describe it, other than like a triangle with wings. It had more, but I can't fully remember every single detail, but those were the main components. There were just lines drawn, connecting what seemed like unrelated cases across the years. Paul just muttered a Jesus Christ and stepped back. There was a thick notebook sitting on the desk too. No title or markings at all. The pages were just packed with notes and scribbles. It wasn't rambling or obsessive. This was clean note-taking. It was neat cataloging, done by someone with a lot of experience logging large amounts of data. It was organized and precise. There were more dates and names marked down. Again, it was missing people. Every note, every clipping, everything in this fucking room was about a missing persons case. Some entries were just summations of local news stories about missing people. They were mostly just pulled from small outlets that were often buried deep in crime sections. Some even had annotations, noting that he could not find these articles anymore after he made note of them, either pulled from the website or just buried underneath other pages. Again, I really did not see the link between them at all, but with the way that they were organized, they had to be somehow, unless we just had a resident schizo. One of the entries noted a small-town disappearance case that had not made it out of regional coverage. Another one referenced an old missing persons case that had been dismissed by local law enforcement as just a runaway. None of the names were familiar. I had not heard any of these cases or about these people before, not even the ones local. The way that they were all cataloged so systematically though, was he investigating or did he just know something more? Each entry looked more like a case file summary than just the delusions of a mentally unwell man. On a few pages, there were loose groupings labeled by city names. Under those were rough statistics, something like 8 cases, 11 years, 3 within 18 months, no formal connection logged. Whoever wrote this, it did not look like they were theorizing. It looked like they were tracking, like they definitely knew something more, maybe about who was doing it or why. We checked the filing cabinets next. There were multiple drawers, all neatly labeled and indexed. Each folder had a name on the tab and an alphanumeric code that looked like an internal cataloging system. Inside were background reports. Some were clearly pulled from public sources, employment histories, address records, voter registrations. Others contained what felt like deep reports, DMV documents, court filings, even health insurance claims. The level of access suggested someone with more than just curiosity. Some of the folders included printed screenshots from social media, profile pictures, event check-ins, tagged photos. Others had maps with apartment buildings or transit stations highlighted in pen. Then there were the photographs. I could not believe what the fuck I was seeing. Tucked inside several folders were high-resolution photos of some of the missing people he was tracking. At first, it was just things like someone walking to their car, entering a store, sitting alone at a fast food place. But the more we saw, the more uncomfortable it got. The same person, captured in different locations, different times of day, always alone, often at night, always unaware of the person taking the photo. The question is, did this fucking freak take these, or did he manage to get them from somewhere? Either way, just how? In one folder, a young man was photographed getting on a late-night city bus, then stepping off blocks later, then entering an apartment building. In the last photo, he is looking over his shoulder, not at the camera, towards something behind him out of frame. Another folder had photos of a woman in a laundromat, reading a magazine, then walking down a hallway, then approaching a locked door. The final photo was grainier than the rest. It looked like it had been taken through a window. She is standing still, mid-step, eyes fixed on something ahead. We found a series of folders near the bottom of the drawer, stored together, slightly separate from the rest. These were not labeled with names, just dates and codes. Inside each was a single photo, printed large and nothing else. Each image showed a different person, looking directly into the camera. No emotion, no context. The lighting was clinical. Almost like ID photos, but with nothing official about them. Just people, frozen in front of the lens. That was the first time Paul said anything in nearly 10 minutes, just a quiet Jesus under his breath. We did not speak after that. At the back of the basement, behind a shelving unit, we noticed a portion of the wall that looked newer. Clean plywood, no paint. The rest of the walls were drywall, scuffed and yellowing. This section looked out of place. We moved the shelf and found a rectangular panel flush with the wall. No visible seams except a small, perfectly cut outline. At the center, a recessed steel handle and a keyhole. There were no markings, no manufacturer label. It did not look improvised. It looked installed. We did not open it. We did not even try. I don't think we even could, even if we wanted to. I don't have an explanation for what that was, but we both stepped back from it at the same time. It felt wrong, like it was not meant to be part of the house. We did not want to snoop too far and get in trouble. We boxed the materials and labeled them. Then we locked the house and filed our report. We mentioned what we found, that we had bagged property for management to review and take up with the authorities. We wrote a report describing the contents, and that was the extent of our job, really. I did not want to be involved. Our boss called both Paul and I in for a chat and basically got us to give a more official statement. They thought we were joking when they saw the report. I did not sleep well that week. Kept thinking about how many of those people had ever shown up in a national database, how many had made it to police reports, how many of those folders were ever meant to be seen, if the police could even do anything about them now, if maybe it was too late for all these people. A few days later, I looked up some of the names I remembered from the folders. Most did not return anything. A few showed up in online obituary databases with no cause of death listed, or just something that said their body had never been found and were presumed dead. One led to a dead link from a campus newspaper where the article had been pulled. It just seemed weird that this one singular guy had more resources and documentation than the fucking police department. Like, he had proof these people were missing and dead, and there wasn't even a fucking article still up on the internet. Not a single police report or file still active. What kind of fucking buffoons were employed by the city? I had to give a statement to the police. Again, they did not really believe it at first either, but I told them everything I saw. Paul said he gave the same statement as before too. I quit the job about 2 weeks later, told them it was burnout. I've tried to let it go, tell myself it was just a paranoid man spiraling out of control, but I'm not sure I believe it. There seemed like way too much planning. Too much, I don't know, inside information. I tried to go back to the house once, just to say. Place was gone. Empty lot. Bank said it was demolished due to mold risk. That makes no sense. That house was bone dry, structurally sound. But the records are gone too. Address does not come up in Google Maps anymore. It's a small town, so that wouldn't usually be too weird, but due to what's gone on, it's really fucking freaky. I tried searching for R for J. Nothing. Not even a tax record. There is no evidence this guy ever existed. Any insight into this act? Did the police just dismiss it because it's just some schizo drawing lines where there are none? I would really like to know what the fuck we stumbled into. Hey, I hope you've enjoyed the story so far. If you do and you want to hear more, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel and leave a comment down below, as it lets the algorithm know that you like my content and it promotes it to more people. My goal for the channel is to hit 50,000 subscribers, and we're closing in fast, so thank you, and back to the stories. My grandparents shared this story with me, and I have no reason to doubt my grandmother's account. She is certainly not someone who could be considered crazy. My great-grandmother, actually, my grandfather's mother, was a true witch and healer, the likes of which you won't find anymore. During the First World War, she used her herbal remedies to treat people, and even before the war, she had helped the local militia against a particularly tough Lady Adaman. She was well known for her herbs, whispers, and infusions well beyond the region. One day, when my father had just learned to sit up, he experienced a strange attack. The baby cried non-stop for 3 days, screaming, wailing without rest. He could not sleep or eat properly. Sometimes we could get him to drink water, but after a sip, he would start crying again as if in pain. In a panic, we took him to every doctor we could find, traveling to the city in my grandfather's wheelchair, but everyone we saw was helpless. There was no proper equipment, no qualified specialists who could deal with such a condition at that time. My dad's face had turned red and blue from burst capillaries. His screams turned into a wheeze, and his eyes were rolling back into his head. After 3 days, we went to my great-grandmother's house late at night. She must have known we were coming, because she was expecting my parents. When she saw my dad, she immediately instructed my grandfather to bring some fresh, untreated water from the nearby stream and wait with her on the porch. He did as she asked and stayed there, not knowing what else to do. Half an hour later, my great-grandmother came out, carrying my father. He was peacefully asleep, completely healthy, with rosy cheeks and a clean diaper. Here is the strange part. As soon as they brought him inside and shut the door, all noises from the street seemed to stop completely. What happened in those moments remains a mystery, and unfortunately, I cannot ask her anymore. That is how it went. The next story is directly from my grandfather. We were talking after a day of fishing, and he shared something interesting, which I will relay in his words. After I returned from the army, I was thinking about what to do next. You know how you sometimes feel drawn back to your homeland. Our old house was in name of the neighborhood, just past the railway line. This was before the fire though. Anyway, I was visiting a friend at the time. He needed help fixing the floors in his house. It was already late when I headed home, and the sun was setting, fading into night. I was walking along the rails, lost in thought, when I saw something strange. A scorched circle. The ground around it was completely smooth. Not a single stone, about 2 meters in diameter, and all around it were tall grasses like cattail, feathergrass, and bluegrass, growing thickly along the embankment. At first, I did not think much of it, and just walked through the circle. As soon as I stepped into it with both feet, everything went silent. It was like I'd entered a fog. I listened carefully, but there was no sound. No crickets, no barking dogs from nearby yards. I looked around, and not a single light was on in any of the windows. As far as I could see, everything was completely still. I got really uneasy then. I stepped back, and it was like the spell had broken. the sounds of the night returned. The crickets started chirping. I could hear my neighbors moving about, the cow shifting in the barn, and the wind rustling in the grass. I took another step forward, and again, nothing. It was like everything had died off instantly. I quickly turned around and started walking home in a forced march, as we were trained in the army. I will tell you honestly, I served in the airborne forces, jumped from planes, and saw death in combat, but I'd never felt the kind of terror that gripped me that night. I went back to that spot again later, and it was the same. Nothing odd during the day, but in the evening or on cloudy days, the eerie silence would return. I will show you the place sometime. It's a wasteland now. This summer, I'm planning to visit my family again, and maybe something will become clearer. We will head back to that spot and see if anything has changed. Another story from my grandfather. After he came back from the army, he was still a young man, very hands-on and keen to figure out how things worked. He loved taking things apart and putting them back together. He would often cruise around on his motorcycle, which he had fixed up himself, piecing it together from parts of old cars. One evening, he was on his way home from work, driving down an asphalt road. It was a quiet night. Everything seemed fine. There was one intersection that everyone considered dangerous. If you weren't careful, cars could crash into the trees on either side. He slowed down as he approached the intersection, looking for any oncoming traffic, and began to make the turn. Suddenly, he heard the furious roar of a truck's engine and saw headlights speeding toward him. My grandfather swerved to the right, hit the brakes, and rolled off the road into the bushes. He was shaken, but not seriously hurt, and the motorcycle, though knocked over, was still in good condition. The driver of the truck climbed out, equally stunned. He started apologizing, saying he did not see my grandfather at all. He had slowed down before the turn and was sure there was no one there. My grandfather reassured him, explaining that he had not seen him either and had only been driving slowly along the empty road. But then, they both fell silent. Neither of them had seen the other coming. Neither had heard anything. Both were experienced drivers and perfectly sober. They could not figure out what had happened, so they both went back to my grandfather's house to lick their wounds and discuss the bizarre incident over a cup of tea. This is a story from me and my parents. It's not a rural tale, but as the saying goes, you can take the people out of the village, but you can't take the village out of the people. We were once on vacation by the sea. I, a little kid, convinced my parents to linger by the bay a little longer. I had never seen such beauty. We were walking along the embankment, an idle crowd enjoying themselves, with shouts and laughter echoing around us. The three of us wandered along the surf, with me collecting interesting pebbles and my father pointing out constellations in the sky. Then, for some reason, my parents stopped and seemed suddenly agitated. I paused, looked at them, and followed their gaze to the sky. Against the backdrop of stars, a perfect equilateral triangle of red dots stood out. These red lights floated silently, forming a perfectly regular triangle in the night sky. There were 5 dots on each side, all moving in the same direction at a consistent distance from each other. Then, one of the outermost points broke away from the formation and moved in a smooth arc, heading in the opposite direction, much faster than its companions. We stood there, amazed. It did not resemble any flying machine I knew, even now. It did not look like anything I recognized, except maybe drones. But back then, in the early 2000s, drones were something you only saw in movies like Star Wars, and most importantly, there was absolutely no sound. As I looked around, I noticed that a few nearby people who had noticed the lights were also watching in awe, silently staring at the sky. Of course, it's selfish to believe that in the vastness of the universe, humanity is the only one with civilization. But while it's one thing to assume we aren't alone, it's quite another to witness clear proof of that hypothesis firsthand. The next story comes from my girlfriend. When she was still a little girl, she moved to our urban-type settlement and quickly fell in with a new group of friends. They spent their time exploring abandoned places. We have plenty of those. old pensioners' houses, forgotten by their children and grandchildren, slowly decaying and falling apart. Some have become sad reminders of the past, while others are just hangout spots for kids. Among all these abandoned places, one house stood out. Although the outside was overgrown with vines, it did not look particularly old. The broken windows and ivy-covered door spoke of a long absence of the owner. This house sat between the last street in the settlement and a rye field. What made it particularly interesting was that despite the sharp temperature changes in the region, the wood on the walls was only darkened by moisture, with only a few cracks here and there. Unlike the other crumbling houses in the area, this one seemed to be preserved in alcohol. The carved door frames, solid roof, and the possibility of a basement filled with treasures made it irresistible to the kids. After sneaking onto the property, they explored the houses, but found nothing interesting except for some henbane, horsetail, and horseradish. However, one friend did find a rusty old metal comb under the threshold of one room. Deciding to take it as a trophy, she kept it, as none of the others wanted the dirty piece of metal. That very night, her friend had a dream. In the dream, she was standing before a figure cloaked in a robe. As she approached, the figure removed its shawl and turned toward her. It was an old woman, with a cold, sharp gaze and an arrogant expression. The woman calmly said, "Put it where you found it," and the friend suddenly woke up. She somehow understood that this was not just a dream. It was a warning about the comb. The dreams continued for about a week. Each time, the girl got closer to the figure, and the old woman grew more terrifying. Night by night, her features became more distorted, sharper, and her face grew patchy with fur and scabs. Her screams grew louder each time. "Put it where you found it. Put it where you found it." Eventually, the girl could no longer sleep peacefully, and she decided to return to the house alone to return the comb. The others could not join her. One was sick with a sore throat, another went to their summer house, and some just abandoned her. Alone, she hurried to the site, but when she got there, she dug a hole and buried the comb near one of the windows. She did not have the courage to go inside the house itself. The next day, she came down with a fever, but the nightmares finally stopped. Much later, she asked her friends about the house. They did not know much, but some people insisted that the old woman who had lived there had done things like that. There was no other information, and no one really looked into it further. This is perhaps the only non-summer story I am sharing here, but I thought it was worth including in this collection of paranormal tales. One February, back when winters were still real winters, cold, with meter-thick snowdrifts, my friends and I decided to embark on a sortie. Yes, cheeky breaky and damke to the grain elevator area. We were eager to see the endless, snow-covered fields with their ruins. In truth, it was a kind of Russian hopelessness, but undeniably romantic. However, somewhere halfway there, we were caught in a blizzard, a fierce one, where visibility dropped to almost nothing, and all that could be seen was a white shroud ahead. The outskirts of the village were obscured by the storm. The road in front and behind us was swallowed by the swirling snow, and the wind howled in our ears. Our faces froze so badly that the snow on our eyelashes and eyebrows did not even melt. Despite the harsh conditions, we, like young, foolish stalkers, morons, decided to continue. 3 small figures, trudging forward through the endless expanse of snow. Fortunately, after about 10 minutes, the wind died down. We did not want to push straight on to the elevator. Our noses and cheeks, wrapped in scarves, had taken a good amount of frostbite and were now aching, so we decided to take the railroad tracks, thinking it would shorten our route. We trudged along, with the blizzard picking up again. The howl of the wind was deafening, snow pouring into our eyes, and the world around us was a blur, white on white. We could not tell up from down, or how much time had actually passed. The snow, you know, has a way of covering up all sense of time and space. Then, I noticed something that did not belong, something out of place. On an instinctive level, I just knew that something was wrong, something that made me yell, "Run," at my friends and shove them off the tracks. We tumbled down the snowdrifts of the railway embankment, and as I was sitting below, finally starting to understand what had just happened, the earth trembled beneath us. A distant rumble echoed through the air, and then the snow began to fly up. But when I looked back, I saw nothing. No train. There was just the straight, arrow-like line of the tracks, stretching out endlessly. It was the sound of a train, the unmistakable rumble, but there was no train coming our way at all.